All right, good morning. We're in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Got a few more verses in this chapter. We should finish them up. Begin with chapter 5. It's been a couple of weeks. Appreciate Clifton for taking the class last week. We left off, Paul had been discussing that he'd been through some difficult times. He'd been troubled, pressed down on every side and so forth, as he described, but not defeated, not totally crushed, not totally not in despair, not forsaken, but he's having a difficult. He's been persecuted and been various. He'd been previously described how specifically he'd been through troubled times, and he'll describe some of that specifically again in the future. But he's not losing heart. We go back to chapter 4, verse 11 and 12. For we which live are always delivered unto death for Jesus' sake, for that the life also of Jesus might be made manifest in our mortal lives. So then death worketh in us, but life in you. He's describing why he was willing to endure these things, why he was willing to put his life in jeopardy, and why? For his own benefit? No, but for theirs. He was willing to suffer for the benefit of others. Nothing was going to deter him. He describes that in verse 13. Nothing was going to stop him. And he quoted from Psalm 16, verse 10 in that text as well. Nothing was going to stop him. He was going to keep going as long as he possibly could for their benefit, for the benefit of the Corinthians and others, of course, that he was working with as well. Let's read verses 16 through 18. That's where we left off last time. We haven't discussed these verses, so let's read verses 16 through 18. 2 Corinthians chapter 4. For which cause we faint not, but though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. While we look not to the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. So as he continues these thoughts on enduring, even in the face of great trials, great difficulties, great pain, even in the face of putting his life in danger, he describes why. Why was he willing to endure these things? For which cause we faint not, he says. His suffering served a greater purpose. And I'm reminded of 1 Corinthians, what he said in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 58. What did Paul say there? 1 Corinthians 15, 58. That's a passage that we know very well. What did he say? Therefore, my beloved brethren, be what? Steadfast, unmovable. Why? For your labor is not in vain in the Lord. And that's Paul's thought right here. Yes, he's diligently working, but he's unwilling to quit, even in the face of great trials. What? Because he knows that his work is not in vain. It's in the Lord. His suffering served a greater purpose. And he says in this text, verse 16, though the outward man perish, Paul's physical body was wearing out. And we can relate to that, can't we? His physical body was wearing out, but not his spirit. And he had a mindset on the eternal. And we can certainly take a lesson from that as well. The mortal man, the physical body, wears out. It decays. It's not going to last forever. So we got to have a mindset on the eternal, a mindset on the spiritual, that which does last in eternity. Questions, comments? Verse 17, for our affliction, or for our light affliction. Now wait a minute, Paul had endured some things that we wouldn't consider light, hadn't he? But he calls it our light affliction. How so? How is his affliction light? That's exactly it. Relatively speaking, right? Comparatively speaking, his affliction was light in comparison to the eternal glory that was waiting. He said, for our light affliction, which is for a moment. Now, he'd been enduring for a while now. He'd been in prison. He'd been left for dead and beaten and so many other things that he has described and will describe. That doesn't sound like just a moment. But he's talking relatively, isn't he? Compared to eternity, this is just a moment. It's temporary. You know, while Paul is describing this here, this light affliction, it reminds me of what he said in Romans 8, verses 17 and 18. Romans 8, verses 17 and 18. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ, if so be that we suffer with him, that we may be also glorified together. Now watch verse 18. For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. Again, Paul had suffered. He'd endured a lot, but he says the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared. With what? With the glory that shall be revealed. With what's coming. Whatever it is that we endure in this life is not comparable to the glory that awaits. And that's what Paul kept in his mind. That's what kept him moving forward in the face of that continual trial and suffering and persecution and so forth. This also reminds me of Jesus. What is said of Jesus? Somebody read for us Hebrews 12, verse 2. Hebrews 12, verse 2.
Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God.
Thank you, sir. So Jesus, for the joy set before him, endured the suffering, endured the shame, endured the cross. How was it joyful? It wasn't a joy in the moment of enduring that pain. It wasn't a joy being rejected and treated the way he was when he came to save those individuals. But how was it a joy? The goal, the purpose. He was looking beyond the right now and looking to the purpose, to the goal, to what he was suffering, the good that it would ultimately accomplish. And Paul had that same mindset. He was suffering, but what was it for? And that's certainly a lesson for us. Now, highly unlikely that any of us are going to suffer the way that Paul did for his faith. But there's still a lesson for us. Whatever we endure in this life, look beyond it and see our main goal. See what we're trying to accomplish with living in this world. If this world was all there is, well, man, the suffering would just be that suffering, and we'd be bogged down in it, and that'd be our focus, and nothing. It wouldn't be worth it. But if we suffer for a purpose, well, that makes a difference. Look beyond this world. Verse 18, that's what he's describing in verse 18. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal. The things which are not seen are eternal. Main message: don't keep your eyes, don't live your lives occupied with this life, and this life alone. rather do what? Look beyond. What's that? Set your mind on things above. Absolutely. It's Philippians chapter 2, I think. Colossians 2, thank you. Focus on what is beyond this world, not the temporal, not the temporary. And sometimes it's hard for us because to distinguish that, because our lives revolve around time and physical things. We live in a physical body, in a physical world, and we know that our time here, our physical bodies will come to an end, and we focus our minds on that so many times. But that's not all there is. So we've got to look past that. He says, while we look, the word look there, we look to watch with attention, to have great regard for, to take great care for, to have great respect for. We look, not focusing on the physical, but on the spiritual. Not focusing on the temporal, but the eternal. Look past right now and see what's been promised. And those concepts remind me of Moses. A couple of passages in Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11, verse 27. Hebrews 11, verse 27. Who's got it? Now, Moses was born in a pretty good position, wasn't he? But he forsook Egypt. He gave up what he could have had as being in Pharaoh's house because he was willing to serve a greater cause. He looked beyond the physical and he saw who was invisible. Go back up in the same chapter, verse 10. Notice what it said of Abraham. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. It'd be easy to focus on what he could see right there in front of him. God, why do you want me to live? Why do you want me to do all this? But he was willing to see what was beyond right here and right now. And certainly that's what Paul is describing here in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. And that's a lesson that we need to remember as well. See beyond this. There's so many things that come up in life that can distract. Don't let that distract you from the main purpose for which we live. Questions, comments? Let's begin reading in chapter 5. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1. For we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, we have a building of God, an house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our house which is from heaven. If so be that being clothed we shall not be found naked. For we that are in this tabernacle do groan, being burdened, not for that which we would be unclothed, but clothed upon, that mortality might be swallowed up of life. Now he that hath wrought us for the selfsame thing is God, who also hath given unto us the earnest of the Spirit. Therefore we are always confident, knowing that, whilst we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord. For we walk by faith, not by sight. We are confident, I say, and willing rather to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord. Wherefore we labor, that whether present or absent, we may be accepted of him. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that everyone may receive the things done in his body, according that he hath done, whether it be good or bad. All right, pause there. Back up to the beginning of the chapter here in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. First word, for. Kind of makes a connection there. With these same thoughts that he's been describing in chapter 4, now he's making a connection as we have the chapter division here. Connection with what he's been saying, especially I think connecting to verse 7. He said he made reference to the having a treasure in earthen vessels, the physical body, but especially I think he's connecting this with what he just said in verses 16 through 18. We just read it just a few moments ago. Why do we faint not? He says, for we, going back to verse 16 in chapter 4, for which cause we faint not. Why? Because of what's coming. And he describes it again here in verse 1. Why are we looking at that which is not seen? Verse 18. Because of what is coming, this an eternal body that he's going to be describing in this text. But first, before he describes this eternal body, he makes reference to an earthly house and calls it what? A tent or a tabernacle. Tent. Now, that's a temporary structure, right? A tent or a tabernacle is a temporary structure. Never intended to be permanent. But what's he talking about, though? What's he calling this earthly house, this tabernacle, this tent? What is he talking about? The physical body, right? For him specifically, his physical body, but certainly we can make that application for our physical body as well. It's just a tent. It's just a tabernacle, a temporary dwelling place. Not intended to be permanent. And remember, I just said a minute ago, back in chapter 4, verse 7, he called the physical body this earthen vessel. It's temporary. And he'll continue to talk about this concept throughout the text that we just read, verses 1 through 10. Talk about the body in that type of manner, that type of context. And the idea is, he said, if our earthly house, this tabernacle, were dissolved, he said, we have the word if there, but the idea is when it's dissolved, it's going to come to an end because he's describing it as temporary. When it ends, when this earthly house, this physical body is dissolved, future unknown time, but it will come to an end. Well, when it does end, what? We have a building of God. A new body. Not something that's physical, but a new body, a building from God, spiritual body. Paul, this is, I think, the same thing that Paul described in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. He was describing the resurrection. What's going to happen to the physical body? Yes, the physical body will be resurrected when Christ comes back, but what's going to happen to it? It's going to be changed. It's not going to be the same anymore. It'll be changed, and it's going to become a spiritual body, a body that is fit for eternity. Paul's talking about the same thing here. He's describing a body fit for the spiritual realm, fit for eternity. A permanent building, opposed to that tent, that tabernacle, that earthen vessel, earthly house, as he describes it in various ways. And this is a building of God, or you could say from God. Not from man. We can't make this type of body. You know, you got your physical body from your parents, your physical body from your physical parents. Well, nobody can give us a spiritual body except God. And that's who will give this. That physical body will be changed. It'll be resurrected, but it'll be changed. Now, although the saved will inhabit heaven with these new bodies, although the saved will inhabit heaven in these new bodies, it doesn't look like Paul is actually talking about heaven in this. Sometimes we read this and we read it as Paul's talking about heaven, that building of God is heaven. in the context, the building of God is not actually heaven. What is it? It's the physical body, or excuse me, not the physical body, the spiritual body that God was going to give us so that we can inhabit heaven. There's a slight difference there. But in the context, that's what he's talking about. Because it's in contrast to the tabernacle, the physical body. This building of God is the spiritual body that God will give us so that we can inhabit eternity. He's talking about that change that he described back in 1 Corinthians 15, that the resurrected body will change into a spiritual body. Eternal in the heavens, a body that is fit for eternity, so that we can live with God in heaven. A permanent dwelling place. Questions, comments about verse 1? For in this we groan, verse 2. In what? He says, in this we groan. In what we groan? Physical body. We're living in his physical body right now, but we groan in his physical body. He's enduring great pain in the physical body. Word groan there means to sigh, and to pray inaudibly, from what I saw and looked up. To pray inaudibly and to sigh. While he's in this physical body, this tabernacle, this tent, he's groaning. Why is he groaning? He has an earnest desire for something else. Earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our house which is from heaven. Again, describing that spiritual body, that house which is from heaven. Right now we have an earthly house, a physical body. But now he's earnestly desiring to long for, earnestly long for, to have great affection for, to have a great love for, desiring to have this spiritual body that's fit for eternity, suitable for heaven. Not a temporary tabernacle anymore. He's desiring that permanent body, spiritual body. Verse 3, as you keep it in its context, I think it's an interesting concept, and I'm not sure exactly what Paul means in verse 3. Think about this with me. He says, if so be that being clothed, we shall not be found naked. Now, keep it in its context. He's talking about two different kinds of clothing here. What are they? The physical body and the spiritual body which is fit for eternity in heaven. Okay? Two clothings. The body that we have now, living on this physical earth, and then the body that God will provide that's fit for heaven, eternity. Now, the reason I find this is an interesting thing, when will we have neither? Because that's the two bodies that he's talking about. But he says, if so be that being clothed, we shall be not found naked. When would we be naked? If the two bodies or two clothings, two bodies that are being considered, are the physical body that we have now on this earth, and then the spiritual body fit for heaven, when would we be naked, so to speak, not be clothed with either?
Connecting it with things about being clothed, like a white robe. That is, the spiritual body that's headed to hell is not fit for heaven.
Okay. Maybe so. I hadn't thought about that perspective before. Maybe that's the sense in which he means. So, certainly Paul would not want to be found that way. Without the robe, so to speak, and that would allow us to, as we're pictured going into heaven, reigning with the Lord and so forth. also wonder, because when is this body going to be changed? When the resurrection happens and the body is changed, that's when, what great event? The second coming of Jesus. But also we lose the physical body when? When we die. So I wonder, I'm not sure, but is he talking about the realm between those two events? The time between the time you die and the time when Jesus comes back and there's a final resurrection. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure the answer. It could be what Clifton brought up. And so if that's the case, maybe Paul is saying, I'd like to be here on earth when the Lord comes. I don't want to be naked. I don't want to be without either my physical body or my eternal heavenly body. I want to be here when the Lord comes back. I'm not 100% sure on it. What thoughts do y'all have? That's true. That's right. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. It's just an interesting thought. But yes, you're entering eternity when you die, but you're in the waiting place until that final coming of Christ. Then you'll receive that at the resurrection. Your body's changed. Now, exactly what state you'll be, that's beyond me to know the exact difference between the waiting place and when your body is changed. And I don't know exactly. But there must be some kind of difference because it's described as your body changing when the resurrection occurs. But Paul, either way, whether it's not wanting to be naked in the sense of I want to be saved, I want that robe and so forth, or if it's I want to be here in this physical tent when Christ returns and not go into the waiting place, I'm not sure. But of course, the ultimate point is Paul wants that that spiritual body that is ultimately promised, one that's fit for heaven. Questions, comments?
Contextually, what you noted about being hating is separate from the body.
Right. Until the resurrection at the second coming of Christ. But I can't say with certainty that's what he means because it's a interesting concept to think about. And why exactly Paul wouldn't want that, I don't know. Because you're still in paradise. What are the thoughts, questions? What's that? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, I guess you could take it that way. I get the impression that he's has a desire not to be found naked. I could look further into it. Mm-hmm. What are the questions, comments? Verse 4. For we that are in this tabernacle do groan, being burdened, not for that we would be unclothed, but clothed upon, that mortality might be swallowed up of life. Got kind of a repeating of verse 2 in this text, but with further more information, more explanation about things. But he says we groan, just like he did in verse 2. For in this tabernacle, this physical body, this temporary dwelling place on this earth, we do groan, being burdened. Go back to chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. Paul describes that we are troubled on every side, yet not distressed, or perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, not forsaken, cast down, not destroyed. He's burdened and groaning in this physical body. You know, when you think about Paul, and as well as other first century Christians, and including the other apostles certainly, they had many sufferings, didn't they, for their faith? Going back to chapter 1 real quick, verse 8. 2 Corinthians chapter 1. See the word pressed. For we would not, this is 2 Corinthians 1 verse 8. For we would not, brethren, have you ignorant of our trouble which came to us in Asia, that we were pressed out of measure above strength, insomuch that we despaired even to life. That word pressed out of measure, same word here, burdened, being burdened. Squeezed down, choked. But earnestly desiring what comes after this life. That earnestly desiring of what we just read about in verse 2. Paul recognized that his physical body is wearing out, but he's not longing to escape this life. He's not wishing for death, in other words. But he's longing for that heavenly body. He's not just wanting to die. He wants to be in that heavenly body. We understand struggles of physical life. We understand burdens of the physical body. Maybe not the same degree that Paul did. But we understand that and desire for that eternal body. That mortality, but clothed upon. Not for that we would be unclothed. He doesn't want to just die. He's not just wishing for death, but he wants to be clothed upon that mortality might be swallowed up of life. Does that wording sound familiar? Swallowed up? Paul used similar terminology in this same two letters here, 1st and 2nd Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 15:54. Somebody read that for us. 1 Corinthians 15:54. And somebody else go back to 2 Corinthians 2, verse 7. 1 Corinthians 15:54. Who's got it?
This corruptible shall have put on incorruption. This mortal shall have put on
There you see that same terminology there. At the resurrection, when the body is changed, the death is swallowed up in victory. Who's got 2 Corinthians 2, verse 7?
that contrariwise you ought rather to forgive him, comfort him, lest perhaps such a one should be swallowed up with overmuch sorrow.
Right, Paul is using terminology that he's used before, isn't he? It's being swallowed up. And in this context, what's being swallowed up? Going back to chapter 5. Mortality. What is that? Well, that's the physical. That's the temporary body that he's talking about. And that temporary body is going to be swallowed up with what? Or of life. Well, he's talking about eternal life. He's talking about that eternal body that he's groaning for. We can relate to looking forward to a time where our bodies won't wear out. And that's what Paul's talking about. Having a body that doesn't wear out. That it's eternal. It's not just temporary. Questions, comments? Verse 5. Now he that hath wrought for us for the selfsame thing is God, who also hath given unto us the earnest of the Spirit. Okay, first of all, who's he? Now he that hath wrought us for the selfsame thing, is God. He identifies who the he is there, right? Who's working? God. That's what the word wrought is, right? Work, or to some translations use the word prepare there. He's prepared us for what? This self-same. He's prepared us for what he's talking about. This change, this different body. God gave us a desire for more than this physical life, this physical body. God gave us a desire for heaven and promised us a heavenly body. He's worked that for us. He's prepared. He's worked us out to have that. And we can have it if we are faithful to Him. Now, second part of the verse there, who also hath given unto us the earnest of the Spirit. What does the word earnest mean? Like a down payment? Somebody said something else over here. Like a guarantee. We use the word earnest, connecting that with the down payment, so to speak. Not exactly the same as a down payment, but we get that concept because when we make a large purchase, oftentimes we'll put down earnest money. That's guarantee money. That means we're serious. We're not just messing around, making an offer here. We're serious. That we're going to, if you accept my offer, we're going to follow through. That's earnest money. It's a guarantee, a surety. Now, what's Paul talking about when he says the earnest, the surety, the guarantee of the Spirit? Well, there could be a number of different ideas concerning that. But when I look at this and I think of what Paul was able to do, what he had through the Holy Spirit, what could Paul do to show that he really was speaking from God and he had this guarantee that he was from God? He had that from the Spirit. Well, he had miraculous abilities. To me, that's what he's talking about. People have different ideas on what that could mean, but that's what stands out the most in my mind, that we know something that Paul had from the Spirit, that it was a guarantee that he was speaking truth. Absolutely. Now, we don't have the earnest of the Spirit in that sense the same way that Paul did, but we have the earnest of the Spirit in that we have a guarantee that this is from God. This written word. He's given us plenty of evidence to show that and to prove it. Paul's talking about this promise of the eternal body, this spiritual body prepared for heaven. That's a guarantee from God, from the Spirit, and he showed that through the miraculous ability that he had from the Holy Spirit. We have that promise, and it's a guarantee. We can study and know it from His Word and be certain of it without any doubt. Questions, comments? He says in verse 6, therefore we are always confident. We have an earnest of the Spirit. We have a guarantee. Therefore we're always confident, knowing that whilst we're at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord. Now, wait a minute. I thought we could be with the Lord even in this life. Well, yes, but there's a sense in which the togetherness is to a totally different realm in the spiritual realm. We'll talk about that more next time, Lord willing. All right, we'll pause there and pick it up next week.